Being an amazing product marketing leader doesn't happen by chance. It happens by habit. Product marketing certified leadership has been built on the back of decades worth of experience from some of the world's best known brands with one goal in mind: helping you be the best leader you can be. Crammed with real life case studies, over 12 hours worth of content, templates, exams, and more, this course is everything you need to lead with authority, confidence, influence, and innovation. Every piece of material within the 7 modules and 29 chapters has been vetted, tested, and approved by senior level product marketers from companies like Amazon, Uber, and HubSpot, serving up game-changing insights throughout. By the time you've wrapped up the final module, you'll be able to define what it takes to be a great product marketing leader, build and scale your team, understand how to successfully manage your existing team, use methods for leveraging data, know how to become the voice of the customer, understand how teams work cross-functionally, and improve your strategic thinking. The beauty of the course is you'll have the freedom to work your way through the modules at a pace to suit you. It's 100% self-paced. You'll even get lifetime access to the curriculum, paving the way for refresher sessions forevermore. Visit productmarketingalliance.com to get leadership certified and spearhead your journey to the top.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick Knapper, Product Marketing Lead at Molly, and welcome to my presentation where today I'll be talking about a topic I'm extremely fanatical about, which is go-to-market, and more specifically, how to launch an API into a market or several markets and keep it there. You might be wondering, what do you mean by keep it there? And by this, I mean how to drive initial market adoption and usage of an API, and adoption really meaning successful completion and integration of an API by a customer, and usage meaning repeat API calls between systems. A bit about me. So my career spans across various consumer tech companies where I've been fortunate enough to be part of and lead incredibly agile growth, brand, and product marketing disciplines. Outside of the office, as much as I like to eat, I love exercising and believe that both are an important part of how we remain sane whilst working in hyper-growth environments. And some sleep is probably important from time to time too. A bit about Molly. We're a European online payment service provider. We reduce the complexity of payments for over 120,000 customers across Europe. We've recently raised 800 million in Series C funding, which will help diversify our product offering, accelerate our pan-European expansion, and solidify our positioning as the most loved payment service provider in Europe. We're also hiring a lot. So what we'll discuss today is we'll wind the clock back to basics and explore what exactly is GTM and why should we care? How does one go about building a bulletproof GTM framework? Writing a killer value proposition for something like an API, which is inherently quite technical. What we'll do there is really look at the value proposition framework and the key things that I believe one should take from a framework and implement into a value prop. The role of sales and marketing in GTM. So 2 key components to drive the success of a go-to-market. How to measure success when launching an API. That's really looking at the types of metrics and measurement you want to use when looking at adoption and usage. And then finally, closing the feedback loop between customer, market, and competitor. You might look at some of these slides and think, wow, that's a lot of information. And yes, it will be. But these will also be made available after the presentation for your own personal consumption. And hopefully, if I make any sense today, you might use them too. So what is GTM? Please excuse my rocket ship space theme. Whilst I personally have never launched a rocket or been into space, I think that there are some basic principles and themes that we can apply to go-to-market presentation, and some are also purely used for inspirational purposes. Go-to-market is an extremely hot topic, verbalized across multiple departments, and it can take many shapes and forms depending on whether you're a startup, scale-up, or enterprise tech company. So today I'll be talking about go-to-market in both a generalist context and then also a hyper-growth B2B context, indulging you in a little bit about how we do GTM at Molly. So how do we define GTM? And according to the internet, go-to-market or go-to-market strategy is the plan of an organization utilizing their outside resources to deliver their unique value proposition to customers. I'm not going to finish this because after doing quite a bit of research on what's out there, I felt that this was extremely irrelevant and out of touch of what go-to-market really is. So I created my own version. Go-to-market is the overarching framework which details the key stakeholders, milestones, metrics, and deliverables a company cohesively follows in order to test and validate the market opportunity, readiness, and positioning of a company's product or service targeted at a predetermined customer segment. Now, of course, this is open to interpretation. And what I really want you to take away is that go-to-market is the overarching process of many sub-processes, all being targeted and pointed in the same direction with the goal of delivering the same result. So in my mind, that's really understanding how do we establish product market fit. I probably could have written this out too, but I felt it was extremely high level. So, now that we've explored the definition of GTM, at least in my opinion, how do you structure GTM in your world? As we know, it can change in duration, structure, B2B, B2D, business to developer, or B2C, markets and audiences. And I think understanding the difference between the types of GTM which apply to your product or feature launches enables you to progress building out your GTM framework and educating stakeholders how GTM is done and the time required to execute it well. So at Molly, we have 3 different tiers, namely to help manage expectations on when we require stakeholders' input, how much bandwidth the team has to deliver against the relevant timelines associated to the different product launches. So this might not be applicable to everyone in the presentation, but I would suggest you use high-level parameters to help determine the tiers of GTM that you have. What I found is quite useful is to use 4 parameters, namely, so audience cohort, who are we targeting, the channel mix, so what channels are we reaching them on, is it owned, is it earned, is it paid, the stakeholders that we need to keep informed and consulted, the outcomes, so what can we expect? This is where we would typically add metrics and measurement, and then the duration, so how long will a GTM take from kickoff all the way through to retrospective? So I think if you understand the fundamentals of why we use a framework to launch products, it helps communicate to all the necessary stakeholders involved and the milestones which need to be achieved. So what does a GTM framework look like? And I've used an example of a tier 2 GTM framework to help illustrate how this framework within Molly is used to steer our GTM efforts forward. So don't be alarmed by the little black boxes, as these are merely sanity checks to ensure that all things are moving forward and in the right direction. I haven't added timings to this, as it can vary depending on the type of product you're launching, or in this case, an API, and these would be typical milestones that I would include. And if you really start at the beginning in the ideation phase, this is really all about determining the feasibility of an API. So why do customers need it? What is the market demand, or at least perceived demand, and how would we go about launching this? And there's multiple validation steps when launching an API that I will include and I will point out accordingly. And as you move forward through the scope of your technical specifications, your development timelines, you might be thinking that that's not really part of a GTM, but this is an overarching framework that I'm sharing. And what we will really focus on is the key points of validation and feedback when launching an API. And one of the key things I think to discuss is also understanding where you're launching your API to. So your API is plugging into an external environment. What does that environment look like? How is data being surfaced and visualized? And this is something that's not often always considered. So I think in my opinion, one of the most important things about GTM is stakeholder expectation management. And really it comes down to identifying who your key stakeholders are. And if you look at this representation, it's quite extensive. I mean, throughout any GTM, you're really touching on marketing, sales, customer support, customer success. You're working with product engineering on revising the timelines. And really what you want to do is understand what are the key learnings and hypothesis going into a beta test, and what do you want to understand coming out of that. And from the beta, I would say one of the key areas is also understanding the approvals and green lights from legal and compliance. That's definitely an extremely important checkpoint, at least within fintech, because the last thing you want to do is be going live or preparing for a launch meeting and they haven't been included, and the outcome is not pretty. I've been there before. You definitely want to make sure that your legal and compliance or security and risk stakeholders are included earlier on. So, if we think about it, this is quite a lot of information. So how can we distill this and make it a lot easier to understand and take it in a step-by-step phased approach? And I believe that if we have to look at a GTM, there are 4 core phases. So discovery phase, have identified all my stakeholders. We use a Iraqi framework. Is the problem statement and solution offering clearly explained? Does everyone understand the why we are doing this and what impact is it going to have? And another point is, have we clearly defined and sized the opportunities so that stakeholders know why we are launching the product? Which is the audience? What type of market share do we want to go after? What level of revenue attribution will this API deliver? The second phase is validation. So beta tests maybe sometimes aren't always a requirement, but they add a huge amount of value when stress testing the product and future-proofing your launch material. So beta is not just necessarily learning about the technical insights, but also using your beta customers to understand, do they resonate with the value proposition? How did they understand the technical documentation? How far do we go to help them with understanding how to design and visualize the user interface on their end to ensure that the information is being surfaced in the most optimal way? And then preparation. So taking all the learnings from beta and implementing them prior to your soft launch or hard launch phase so that your GTM material is airtight and that your team is tracking the right metrics. And then finally, launch and iteration. So your soft launch phase can be either single market focus or multi-market. We typically launch in one market and test the adoption. And then if everything is green light there, we roll out across additional markets in a sequential manner. And then the iteration part is really focused on leveraging both the internal and external insights from your previous data points to help make more informed decisions as your product adoption and usage starts to grow. So something that's super important that I think we sometimes neglect or ignore is understanding the roles of sales and marketing. And in my experience, sales and marketing counterparts play a crucial role, not only launching your API, but driving initial market adoption and, more importantly, feedback and insights with supporting qualitative and quantitative data. And these are where the feedback loops come into play, and not just how critical they are in understanding how to establish product market fit, but also ensuring that the insights that you retrieve and distill is circulated with all your key stakeholders. If you think about the types of questions that a GTM plan should answer, you really need to be a little bit empathetic to your sales and marketing teams and really understand what role will they play and how can you help guide them. And if we had to start with product marketing, what I would typically be asking myself is, how have we quantified the demand for a new product, feature, or market? Who are we targeting? What is our message and unique selling proposition? Have we defined the right personas and decision makers? Who are the key stakeholders in our GTM? Which customers are we co-launching with from our beta? And what supporting product material do we need to create in order to create an impactful launch? And if you had to think about understanding what questions our sales teams would ask is, what material do we have to sell our products and how has it been localized? So something that's extremely important when you're dealing in multinational markets is really understanding how do you localize and locally contextualize the material that you're helping with your sales teams. And that can typically go as far as, for example, if we're showing or wanting to pitch to a new customer that is in retail in Germany, we would really like to use proof points or references of previous retail customers in that region that they can resonate with. So how have we defined the eligibility of our targeted customers? So what kind of profiles are we going after? Is it based on revenue? Is it based on vertical? And how have you forecasted the acquisition plan? So when aligning with sales and understanding the types of perceived demand for whether it be a new product or a product that you're just launching in order to ensure that you're aligned with your competitor product offering, what are sales seeing in the market that maybe you're not exposed to? And how can we help, again, create material that can help them attract, convert, and win new customers? What does the customer onboarding look like? So something extremely important when looking at signing up a new customer. There's multiple things that you look at onboarding, whether it be risk, compliance, regulatory environment. One of the most important things that I think we need to be mindful of is when launching an API is that some customers can, totally autonomously read the documentation and complete the integration within a week, maybe even faster, whereas others can take 4 to 5 weeks. So really, what does that cycle look like and what can we do to help accelerate it? What is our pricing strategy? So how does our pricing compare to competitors? Are we above? Are we below market? Are we aligned? Is there negotiation room? These are all things that sales definitely need to better understand what their role is and how can they play a part in GTM. And then marketing. So when does marketing need to get involved? Is it pre-GTM? Is it soft launch? And what are marketing stakeholders? Is it content marketing, digital marketing, performance marketing, or all of them? What kind of content do we want to market our product with locally? So do we do animation? Do we do sales team one pages? Do we do paid media, website landing page? And then what are the audience demographics? And this is more specifically on the performance marketing side for targeting. And then what supporting marketing do we need? So again, it goes back to, what is the channel strategy, digital PR, thought leadership. And really, once you've been able to answer these questions, it creates a much clearer picture for understanding who does what, when, and how, and where with your sales and marketing team counterparts. So writing a killer value proposition. So value proposition is one of those phrases like paradigm shift and synergy that started out as a good idea, but then was so overused that a lot of people don't really understand the importance of it. And I think a good place to start is how not to write a value proposition. And in my experience, don't create a value proposition based on internal biases or anecdotal feedback, as this is not representative of your customer's need state or attractive to your customer's intent. Try avoid making baseless claims. So making no use of data to back up your messaging. And I would really focus on 3 things. And if we look at the typical value proposition canvas, so something that I've used multiple times and it's really easy to use when workshopping new teams, sometimes you only really need to focus on 2 or 3 things. And for me, it's really, how have we identified the customer gains? So what makes their lives easier? Then understanding the pains. So what do they hate about their jobs to be done? Is it because they are time scarce or they have lack of developer capacity? And once you understand those, you need to align the pains and gains to the product features. Sometimes you may have 7 features, other times you may have 2 features. But what this does is it really addresses the simplicity of how you are marrying your product offering or product or feature offering to the customer's needs. And as an outcome, what are we giving them? So how are we making their lives easier? Something that I found is crucial in the value proposition development stage is how to validate these claims. So 9 times out of 10, what I've believed is a kick-ass value prop, like really thought I nailed it, it changed several times before we got to launch. And that was purely because we just iterated and iterated with new customers joining the beta and them giving their feedback on what resonates strongly, what type of words do they find compelling versus statements that are just baseless. Measuring success. So measurement and metrics, these mystical things that we speak about like North Star metrics and so on. What I'll be talking you through the next few slides is may come across as a bit overwhelming, but rightfully so. There are heaps of metrics that you need to consider when launching an API. So how I like to approach measurement and metrics is start very broad. And an example is to categorize the different metrics so you anticipate measuring. And again, I would treat this as an initial shopping list for yourself and your data analyst if you have that luxury. And typically, for an API, we focus on product performance. And what that really means is bottom of funnel. So a term that I like to use is vanity, sanity, reality. And some of you may have heard this phrase before, or may have heard it in a different context. And why I really like using it is that when launching an API, you really want to focus on the reality. So, and maybe some sanity, but really like, what kind of adoption are we seeing? What's driving adoption and what's inhibiting adoption? And that's really getting down to understanding, and again, to those feedback loops, is understanding what are customers seeing, why are they dropping off, what's extending their time to integration. And if we had to classify some of the signals that we look for in determining a healthy GTM, so that's launch metrics, API adoption, and time to integrate. Product revenue indicators, so attribution to TLR, BLR, and customer lifetime value. Product usage, so revenue attribution per API call. This is something that is extremely technical and quite hard to determine, but it is possible. So customer happiness, how are you engaging with customers once they've integrated or completed an integration? Is it with customer effort score or net promoter score? And then your win rates. So how quickly are sales teams closing, and what is their lead to conversion percentage? I think that if you had to look at the way that we go from a channel perspective, so this is kind of just really understanding how do we define owned, earned, and paid, and what are the types of channels that exist and the metrics that we use to assess them. This is something more when you're looking at further down the GTM plan on the execution side, but still very relevant to understanding kind of the full funnel reporting of how your GTM is performing. So closing the feedback loop. So you've launched an API, there are early adopter signals, they're looking promising, but when do you close the feedback loop, and who do you close it with? So something that is a lot easier said than done. And really, there are feedback loops throughout your GTM lifecycle. And sometimes, if it's a big GTM, like a tier 2 or tier 3, as I mentioned, you're going to have feedback after beta, you're going to have feedback after launch, you're going to have feedback after hard launch. And it's an ongoing process. And you really need to determine who drives this and which stakeholders are anticipating the learnings. And more importantly, what do you do with the learnings? So yes, you've compiled feedback, but then what next? So how are you really optimizing your product and offering? And more importantly, also from a GTM perspective, your messaging. How are you continuously iterating in the different markets? Like, when we launched an API in Germany, the value proposition was somewhat different to how we launched that same API in France, because the wording resonates differently when you look at it linguistically. So what can you take away from today? I think, how to launch an API into a market. I think, a few key lessons was, clearly define your problem and opportunity, build your stakeholder matrix, validate your messaging and material, and a sequential phased rollout. So really to try and mitigate risk and customer support inbound, taking a sequential phased approach really kind of helps you mitigate those things. And then how do you keep your API in the market? So fast feedback loops between sales, support, and marketing, bottom of funnel measurement, as we discussed, so more focused on the sanity and reality, and ongoing research with customers. So really, drive that culture of being customer obsessed. Thanks so much. I hope that you found this enlightening and informative. I really enjoyed talking about this topic. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to go through some of the material, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Hope you have a great week.